a treatment talk program from the Bladder Cancer Advocacy Network. And tonight's topic is what you really need to know about clinical trials as a treatment option for bladder cancer. And we're really delighted to have you here. And again, I'd like to welcome Dr. Peter O'Donnell from the University of Chicago and Dr. Neal Shore from down in South Carolina. And we have two patients with us today. We have Bob Wren and Kevin Williamson, and hopefully Bob will be connecting shortly. So I'm just going to start by welcoming you all for being here with us. I'm so glad that we're having a little technical difficulties with Bob, but I'm pretty sure we're going to get that resolved. And I wanted to talk a little bit about clinical trials as a treatment option, because a lot of people don't always think about this. And the difference with treatment talks, these different types of webinars that we have, is that we're bringing in the patient voice into the conversation. So we wanted to make this a little bit comfortable for both patients and the doctors to talk about these things. And when we did a little bit of planning, we thought it would be really helpful to do a little bit of myth busting, because I think that there's a lot of myths about clinical trials. And so what I thought I would start to do is give everybody a chance on the panel to address the issue about I have to go to a big research hospital to be involved in a clinical trial. Dr. O'Donnell, I'm going to ask you a quick question to get us started. You're in a large academic institution at the University of Chicago, and you do many clinical trials, right?
Correct.
So is that the only place in Chicago that people can get into a clinical trial?
I'm sure it's not. So, sometimes patients have that myth that clinical trials are only happening at the big academic centers. And while it might be true that academic centers have maybe access to more clinical trials on average, one of the big pushes is actually to get these clinical trials out into the community so that all can have access. And I think that certainly over the past decade or so, we've done a good job of that in bladder cancer, and Dr. Shore might be able to speak to that as well.
Right. So Dr. Shore, you're there in Carolina, in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, in a large urology practice, and you do clinical trials in your practice. So I think because that makes it a little bit more convenient, you're in the community. That would be more of just making it easier for people to get involved in a clinical trial so that they don't necessarily have to drive a long distance, because you're kind of a long distance from some major cities in South Carolina. So for people who live on the shore, that might be hard for them to get to. Why do you do clinical trials in your practice? And do all urologists or medical oncologists do clinical trials in the community?
So there's a lot of things there that I think are really important. I'm really looking forward to hearing, both Kevin and Bob talk about their initial impressions when a physician would say to them, "Hey, we've got a clinical trial," and what was their initial reaction. The bottom line is, I've been in community practice now since 1990, and I've done over 400 clinical trials.
Wow.
And I'm really proud of the work that we've done at Carolina Urologic Research Center. I started the facility in the 90s. I have 18 full-time employees. It's all we do are clinical trials. And, prostate cancer, at least in the world of geo-oncology, was getting all the attention the last 15 years. And in the last 5 or 6 years, bladder cancer's really come into its own. In fact, Stephanie, and I think Peter would agree, we have more trials than we can find the right patients. So we have this sort of embarrassment of riches. We have so many great trials. Now, why are trials important and why do I do it? It's the same reason why anybody does research, is because we have unmet needs. And at our core, whether you're a community practitioner or you're a researcher in academia, we're all physician scientists. And when we have patients who are still dying of advanced cancer, or we need better diagnostics to identify early stage bladder cancer, or better markers to understand who's going to respond or not, this is what makes precision-based therapy and makes us all better. So I think I speak for Peter and everyone at Beacon. We are 100% committed to bladder cancer research, because that's the only way we, number one, up our excellence in the approved therapies by FDA, CMS, but and commercial payers. But more importantly, it's always about trying to find new diagnostic tests, new biomarkers, whether it's blood-based or urine-based, and new therapies, so that we don't have patients succumbing to bladder cancer. And those are all the reasons. And the answer is that we're getting more community-based sites involved, both medical oncology and urology. I think combining the excellence and the expertise of Beacon, the AUA, the SUO, ASCO, LUGPA, we're all really working together now to say we all need to be doing clinical studies. In fact, being a clinical study option is in the guidelines for all of the leading organizations throughout the US and the world. Being involved in a clinical trial is a standard of care, frankly. And I think this is a very, very important message.
Yeah, it is. And I'm really glad that we're here to have an opportunity to share that message. I know that some people are a little bit anxious about being in a clinical trial. Kevin, why did you participate in a clinical trial?
Well, it was the third thing that I did after chemotherapy and targeted therapy. So we were definitely looking for answers, and happened to be in the right place at the right time. This was 8 years ago. So I don't think the trials were quite as plentiful back then. But, we were with Dr. O'Donnell, and he had access to the trials and made them available to us, talked about it, asked questions. And at my stage, for me, it kind of felt like, I'm not sure it was, but it kind of felt like it was my last chance. So I had tried other things that were available prior.
Okay. And let's see if Bob is able to have audio on there. Bob, can you hear
I'm
me?
here.
Okay, so why did you do a clinical trial? You're not in a big city. Kevin is
Why did-
closer to Chicago.
Why did I do a clinical trial?
Yep.
Well, quite frankly, Dr. Shore said to me, "You have prostate, you have bladder cancer," and then he says, "But I got this program. I want to put you in for a test program." And he says, "But I'm going to take care of you." So I said, "Well, you know what? Let me think about that." And about 5 minutes later, I said, "Well, I'm 80. At the time, I was 80, 87, 86. I says, maybe God put me here to do this clinical trial, and maybe it will help somebody else." So that's kind of where I came from, because it seems to me that I had to have some kind of treatment, so I might as well do his clinical trial while I'm doing it.
Well, that's a good reason to do that. And so, Dr. Shore, tell me about that in terms of, is there an age limit for clinical trials?
Well, I would just say that my friend, Mr. Bob Wren, who just gave you an answer, he's 87 going on 47. He is a prolific exerciser, and he's a proud graduate of Virginia Tech, which is a beautiful university. I would encourage everybody to go and take a look at that.
Oh my God.
It's all about performance status, meaning, how is a patient living their lives? I don't think there is any limit on an age. Of course, we have some, men and women who have a lot of health issues, and they're frail, and they're even arguably in their 40s and 50s. Maybe they're severely obese and have, bad, poorly controlled diabetes. Maybe they've had vascular problems. Maybe they've even had an amputation in their 40s. And then you've got, a lot of men and women like my friend Bob here, who is extremely active. And so I do not, hold back on patients because of a chronologic age. It really comes down to how fit they are, their performance status, and very importantly, their desire to keep going. the will to make it to another milestone of life, a child's graduation, a wedding, a trip, once COVID simmers down. So my answer, Stephanie, is unabashedly, I don't let age get in the way. That's just a number.
Yeah. And Dr. Shore, I know, excuse me, Dr. O'Donnell, when we're looking at clinical trials, isn't it important to test a treatment option in the actual population that will be using it? So isn't that also why it would be important to ensure that older people are part of a clinical trial?
Of course, a lot of people wonder about that, and they want to say the doctors want to be able to use the results of the trial to generalize to other patients. But even beyond that, I want to remind folks, and I know Dr. Shore believes this too. We're doing these clinical trials to help the patient that's sitting in front of us, right? When Mr. Williamson came to me, he's the one that needed the treatment, and I actually believe that the clinical trial was the best option for him to help his situation, not to try to generate some research down the future. Yes, we hope to generate new treatments for thousands of patients to come, but really the doctor's first obligation is to try to find the best option for that patient there. And I'll address maybe one of the things that you've shown on the slide here, Stephanie. And a lot of patients feel that, and Kevin even said that he felt like in his case it was the last option, right, for his situation. And at that time there weren't a lot of options, but we have a lot of clinical trials now that are trying to compare newer options to the existing standard. And so that could mean it could be the frontline therapy. This could be the first line treatment that you're going to receive for your cancer. And we're trying to still improve upon that to cure an additional percentage of patients. And so it's not as if clinical trials are only when you feel like you're out of options. You might be, actually appropriate for a clinical trial much earlier in the course of your disease. And it does not mean that you're getting a sugar pill, right? It doesn't mean we're trying to experiment something on you. It might actually just be a way to get a treatment earlier than might be available to the general population. The FDA, the government have a requirement that doctors, test these therapies often in all settings of the disease, right? That you can use an approved drug and then just use that in a different earlier setting of the disease, and that still has to be tested.